know some people are still standing outside, and I let them talk with themselves. I won't take much time actually. I know we are running short of time here, so I just want to quickly run through a few things here. I was in my introduction. I was talking about why I went to the UK 20 years back and looking for an understanding of capitalism and looking for a visual existence of what I thought was what a moral society would be. What I think has happened in the last 20 years and what I think might happen to the West if it continues accepting immoral policies in society and politics. There are a few friends of mine who, some of them say, why did I leave one socialist country to come to another socialist country? And my usual response to these guys is, they haven't seen anything yet. I know some Indians are here, and I love if they either contradict me or question what I'm saying, so that's a great thing. I don't see myself as an Indian, I don't see myself as a Canadian. Those are just political boundaries which I don't believe in, and I just want to differentiate between the cultures, and this is all I'm talking about here. So I have no interest in offending either Canada or India here. I think it's once you start accepting a slightest possible coercion in the society, it makes people gullible. Their thinking becomes irrational. It becomes a sort of floating abstraction. And then the society, the elders, the family, the politicians and bureaucrats are in a position to exploit you more. And that's what happens everywhere in the world. And now people become increasingly so stupid. And as you see what's happening in Greece, they are in a horrible shape, but people have become so stupid that they are on the streets fighting for more raise in their salaries. And European Union brought in a new law, or whatever they call it, which now makes vacation a human right. Now, what kind of worldview society of those countries must be? And Europe has degenerated so much within the time that I have seen. What kind of worldview you should have to be accepting such obscene regulations by the government? People should actually be on the streets saying, we do not want these freebies. This is immoral. That's not what's happening. Now, when I tell them about my friends about India, they say, well, this is not going to happen in Canada. Well, let's just look at what's happening in Europe. In just 20 years, things are happening in Europe which would not happen in Europe 20 years back. 20 years back, when I first went to the UK, I was very happy. The kind of people I saw, they were self-confident people. When the security officers at the airport stopped them, they were proud people. They responded to those people. In just May 20 years, so much has changed. These people say, take off your clothes, and they take off their clothes. Even the situation today is that at many places these days, they don't actually ask you not to remove your shoes, but people actually instinctively remove their shoes these days. So I don't know what's happening, what way it is going, but I just want to talk about what I saw and what is happening now. So and unless these countries change their morality, it is going to go downhill, and TARP and all these this is not about economics anyway, it's all about morality, and I fully agree with what Mr. Reid talked about, and that's what makes me a fan of Mr. Reid. Now, I want to talk about a background. This is 1983 or 1984, not too long back ago. I would sleep on the roof of my family's house. I had no concept of what a TV was. We had no refrigerator at home. We hardly had any electricity. And I would sleep on the roof of the home, and I would watch the stars, and I would think, these are the stars which connect me with America, because Americans see the same stars as I do. Now, this fantasy was a sign of desperation, because there was no way out of a totalitarian society that I could see. So stars were the only thing I could imagine as a person from a small town to get out of a totalitarian society. Those were the days when, and I'm sure other Indians would agree with it, anything, because there was so limited concept of what non-Indian meant, that even if it was made in Cambodia, it would sell for an obscene price in India, because anything which was non-Indian was so acceptable in that country, because everything to do with India was people did not like each other, and people hated socialism. And this is another thing which I find very interesting, that in the West, people have a different understanding of what socialism means. When I was in the UK for the first time in 1991, I was on one side of the street, and I was looking at a map, and I had no concept of what a map was, because everything in India those days was, all these maps were a state secret. So we had this map, big map of India, and that's all we had. So I was trying to understand, rotate a map, trying to understand the city. Maybe for the bigger cities in India there were maps, but certainly not of my city. So I was trying to rotate the maps, trying to understand where I wanted to go. And the guy from the other side of the street, a very well-dressed guy, this was early in the morning, he crossed the road, came to me and said, "Sir, can I help you?" And this is the UK. And I, almost instinctively, my hands were in my pocket, because this is what I associated with socialism, because there is no generosity in socialism. The person who wants to help you expects something in return. As someone said, socialism is not socialism. Socialism is a very corrupted form of capitalism. Everyone thinks of himself actually in a socialist society. It's an extremely materialistic society, something even a lot of libertarians and capitalists don't understand. Socialists are actually very materialistic and very extremely selfish in a negative way. I know there are different ways of defining selfishness. Ayn Rand would define it differently, but this is in a very negative sense. People are selfish. They have, because of a socialist way of thinking, they don't work. They don't want, the focus is no longer on creating value. The focus on finding loopholes around the regulations, trying to make money in certain way. There's a saying in Hindi, and this is a popular saying in Hindi, which says that you can scoop butter out of a crooked, you can only scoop butter out of a crooked finger, which basically translates into that the way to make money is to be crooked. And this is an acceptable saying there. Maybe things are actually changing recently, but this is what I saw when I was growing up. Now, I have a friend, I have a relative in India when I travel with him in India, there's a policeman there are more traffic policemen in India than there are normal policemen, and traffic is chaotic in that country. But when he crosses that road, the policeman salutes him. And I once asked him, why does he salute you? And he says, because he's a businessman, he has nothing to do with, he's not in anything in the government. And his response is that he gives bribe to this policeman so that this policeman salutes him every time he passes. And that's, and that's his power game. And the power game is, and as I said, people lose focus on creating value. They get focused on trying to manipulate the system, trying to find loopholes, and that's a completely skewed way of looking at the world. And that makes their way of thinking, which is so irrational, and they become so gullible that the same people who are tyrants, they can be fooled so easily. It's a country, it's a system, it's a strange, irrational system that comes out of the whole thing. And what you have, I mean, you cannot have prosperity unless you create value. That's a very simple thing, and it's such a simple mathematics that evades so many people. You cannot create prosperity without creating value, by having a crooked finger, by becoming rich just because you are being able to evade some laws which are actually indirectly stealing money from someone else, does not create prosperity for a country. And that is why socialist societies are invariably poor, immoral, and in social decay. And in my opinion, that's what's happening in the West, at least in the last 20 years that I have been in these countries for. Now, I have worked in India for almost, my dad is a businessman, and I have worked with him all my life, and I've worked independently in New Delhi for about 10 years. And I have met hundreds of politicians and bureaucrats during those days. And I have to say, I have not met one single politician or bureaucrat who is honest. They all accept bribes, and they all want bribes. My earliest memory as a child, and again I have to say India is a big country, so people from bigger cities might have a different point of view on this aspect, but this is my version of the thing. I have no memory of having lived a happy childhood, because the whole social system, educational system, the political system was of harassment. My teachers, if I were happy and if I were happy learning a subject, my teachers would immediately come and beat me up, because how can anything be enjoyable which is worth it? And this is the kind of worldview you create as in a socialist system. And whenever I have talked with people from East Europe, South America, and I haven't heard this thing from other Asian people, but after a couple of beers, they all accept what I'm saying is exactly what happens in those countries. I think the world is not about East and West or black and white. It's about socialism and capitalism. And capitalism is the way I defined it in my introduction. A society becomes tyrannical or free depending on what kind of cultural beliefs that society has, which is whether they allow freedom for people or they do not allow freedom for people. Now, when I was talking about teachers beating me, the society oppressing me, this is how a totalitarian socialist society indoctrinates you, because everyone thinks he knows how you should live better. And this is where socialism fails in its very basic tenet, that everyone thinks how you should live. And so what this means, there's no equality. There are only hierarchies, because everyone is telling everyone else what to do. And this whole social and cultural system, because of this, is that people come and tell you what to do. And I mean, even now when I go back to India, my neighbors have the guts to come and say, why are you not married? Why don't you have children? Shouldn't you do this? Shouldn't you do that? So and they think it's a perfectly okay thing to be intruding in my private life, and when I don't even know their names. In 1991, I went to the UK for the first time in my life. That was the first time I left India. And I got off the train, and I got off the plane, went to the train station, and there was this lineup. And I stood in that lineup, and I went to buy my ticket to go to Manchester. The ticket line moved smoothly. When I went to the ticket checker, he talked with me, explained me how I was going to get to Manchester, and while this was happening, there was no one pushing me or rushing me to speed things up. I have to say, this was a completely alien thing for me, because in India, a lineup is not a lineup, it's almost like a circle, And if were it possible, it would be a sphere. I have to say, actually, I have seen almost a spherical lineup in Nepal where people actually climb over each other. So I think it's just about how selfish and in a very negative way people become in a socialist society. This concept of lineup actually shows you how respectful people are of each other. If there is any compassion or interest in other person's interest people have. So, and I'm constantly surprised that people don't see that. They go to a socialist country and they go to India and say, well, it's such a spiritual country. Haven't you been to India? I mean, the thing is that these guys come there for what? I have spent a lot of time, and this is because I grew up in a socialist system. I wanted to get rid of my socialist conditioning. I have spent a lot of time doing meditations, and I meet all these people, and they oh, India is such a spiritual. I know it's a spiritual country, or not. I don't know, but the thing is that what are these guys doing? A lot of them are on dole, on social security. How can you be free when you are stealing money to live a so-called spiritual? I mean, what a weird kind of situation it is. What are these guys doing? Most of them are on marijuana. They are there because they get cheap drugs in India. And then because they get money from Canada, they live in India, they get all these cheap stuff, they think it's all great. It's not. Now, anyway, just going on this train, the train was, when I was on a train from London to Manchester, it was a great train, clean, comfortable, and my eyes had not seen with that kind of clarity before, because the air was so clean. In India, there's always smoke around you and a smell around you, but not here on this train. The next morning, I told you about this guy who crossed the road when I was in the UK. This is my first day in the UK. The guy crossed the road to help me. I went to the bank. My work was done in a few minutes. And I went to the accommodation office. I had a room in a few hours or so. And I had, of course, huge financial problems. And the director of the business school helped me sort out my finances. And this was again very funny because he was on the first name basis, which I was completely unaccustomed to. He let me into his office, which would have taken months of bureaucratic procedures and interviews and pre-interviews before I could meet a person of that stature. But he talked with me, and he talked with me very humbly and very nicely, despite that I was completely broke. Now this all happened in one day. I got to my room that evening and I cried because I had not seen this kind of generosity in my life. And over these 20 years, I have learned and earned a lot from the Western civilization. But this is what's changing, because West is no longer the same West anymore. Now, this is, when I was in the UK, I would work till about 2 o'clock in the night because I was completely broke. I had no money with me. And I would, every night at 2 o'clock in the night, I would walk back home in a very bad part of Manchester, which was at that time supposed to be the most unsafe place in Europe. And the police would switch off their car lights and follow me. And policemen would follow me. I remember they having done that at least 10, 20, 30 times during those 6 months that I stayed in that place. But not once did they stop me to ask me for an ID card, who I was, because the law did not allow the policeman to stop me without an evidence of my having done anything wrong. Those first 3-4 months while I was in the UK, that they were almost I was completely broke. I was eating boiled potatoes and rice, but those 3 months were probably the most happy days of my life. I was scraping off the socialist conditioning. My facial muscles, my eyes started to change, and those 3 months were the most enlightening experience I've had in my life. And I'm actually, despite that, I complain about the West these days now, because as I said earlier, I have this conditioning in which I have a pessimistic frame of mind. So now that I have come to so-called such a good country, I still complain. But I have to say, when I go out on the streets, I still see the kind of character and self-responsibility and ethics that impresses me even today. Now, just 2 more minutes of what I see is happening in the West now. Having said what I saw happening in the West 20 years back, I mean, U2's Bono tells me that I should pay 0.7% of my taxes should go to people in Africa. The guy, the singer, himself wears thousands of dollars of glasses. He has tax shelters in Europe. What kind of thinking process all these youngsters have who accept this kind of complete BS? I mean, Bono should at least reduce his own lifestyle to a lifestyle of an African, or at least a lifestyle of an average Canadian before he should start asking for anything like that. But he gets away with those kind of things. Now, I mean, these days, and this is again in the last 20 years, this new concept of corporate social responsibility now. What an immoral concept it is. You can sell virtually any kind of junk in Europe, in the Western society these days, as long as you have environmentally friendly written on it, or fair trade. What is happening? People have become extremely gullible in these societies. I think that's pretty much completes my speech. I just want to tell you one story about a guy I knew in New Delhi. He was a senior bureaucrat and an extremely corrupt person. Well, every Indian politician bureaucrat is. But I used to meet him quite often. And he used to tell me that I like my whiskey more when the other person drinking whiskey has a lower quality of whiskey with him. And that's a socialist frame of mind. This is what I've seen so often. Socialism is a product of is a system of envy and hatred. Now, this guy had made loads of money. He bought a big house for his son in London. He bought a big house for another son in New Delhi, and he was providing finances for his other son in New Delhi, and he was financing education for his other son, the first son in London. And he was extremely generous with those 2 kids. And one day, I was in a meeting, I was having dinner with him, and he said, he was almost crying, and he said, you know what, I have done so much for my children. I have given them whatever they ever wanted, and all they look for me is, they only expect money from me. They don't come to meet me when I'm here. When they come here, they want to go out by themselves. And I had no sympathy for him. I did not tell him what was happening there. But it's very simple what was happening there. You create a product from theft. He does not differentiate, and the product is children. He does not differentiate whether then he steals from you, from another person, or from you. He will steal from you eventually. So when socialists in Canada want a government which can steal from wealth creators, you should feel anxious irrespective of whether you are poor or rich, because those bureaucrats know only one thing, and that is theft, and they will come and steal from you as well. And that's why socialists never get anything. It's the politicians and the corporatist parties. Thank you for listening, and that completes my talk. Just about 2 questions, or maybe you can just talk. Well, I have an Indian asking a question. Yes, Tony.
you managed to make me slightly unhappy grandmothering India, so I think I need to put the other person.
Sure.
I was born in India like you. I've lived equal number of years in Hong Kong, in USA, and in Canada. I've never worked in India, I only studied there. Nonetheless, I think I'm as much a product of India as you are. I never had an unhappy schooling. I didn't study in any big city. I studied in Shantiniketan, creation of Tagore. It was a rural community. I did not know the difference between socialism and capitalism till I came outside of India. I did not run away from the country. Jobs just came my way. I was offered a job in Hong Kong, I took it. I was a sailor before, as an engineer on a ship. I've been all around the world, so I was kind of a stateless. And when the offer came, I took it. And I ran away from Hong Kong because China was taking it over and I was afraid of Chinese communism. I got an offer in UK, USA, I took it. I fell in love with Canada, and it's the only country I actually tried to get immigration of. I was happy to know that they gave it to me. I again got a job offer, I didn't look for it, and I took it and I quit my job in USA. Now, about India, the way I see it is, first of all, in the 18th century, if I read history correctly, India enjoyed a standard of living higher than UK. There was a couple of hundred years of colonization where Indians who were a capitalistic society at that time were not allowed to manufacture salt. As simple thing as a salt, they had to buy from British shops. India in 1750s is recorded to be the best producer of textiles in the world. British people would pay high price, the elites, to get fabrics made in India. What happened? Indian cloth mill owners who would make fabric, were not allowed to operate. So all the Indian cotton had only one market, the British market. They would buy it at whatever price the British would buy it because there's just nobody else who is allowed to use it. And then it goes to Britain. The mills came up making profit, sending the material back to India, and the poor Indians had to buy that.
Okay,
that was one of the reasons that Gandhi took up all these things. Now, about socialism, I don't know whether all this equates with socialism at all or not, but socialism, as little I know of history, in India, comes from the first generation of nationalistic politicians, Gandhi and his predecessors. And where did they get it from? They got it from UK. UK last century was a hotbed of socialistic ideas. These people went there, they were all children of affluent people, they were not poor. They went there, studied there, picked up the socialism, came to India and said, we want democracy, we want the British out, and we want to have a socialistic society. So it's probably not very fair to say everything in India is bad. They're starting from a terrible condition, 98% illiterate, they don't know how to run a government, and they're going their way. So we should take it in perspective. When you go to London, you find everything.
Yeah, just to put this in, just to very briefly respond to you, it's not about India, and I'm not saying, and I'm not saying that. Okay, let's just go back to Shantiniketan you were talking about in Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore, who created Shantiniketan where you went to study, was a school created by a guy who opposed Gandhi in fighting for freedom.
Yes, in
okay?
some ways, yes.
Ram Mohan Roy, who also grew up during the same time, which was mid 18th century, he was actually on the side of the British, because in India those days, and this is mid 18th century, and that's why I don't necessarily agree with you that British were the cause of India's poverty. Those people wanted British to stay in the country because India had such horrible social and cultural conditions, dowries, child marriages, widow burning, horrible caste system. So you can't blame those things on the British. And that's why these two people wanted to associate themselves with the British rather than fight against him, And I don't really want to say anything about Gandhi here because that's another area of conversation. But if I were, I would rather belong to Tagore and Ram Mohan Roy's camp than to a camp which would throw away the only system which was actually trying to improve India. And that's all I can say to that.
I agree with you, except small correction. Tagore didn't want the British to stay in India. What the main difference he had with Gandhi is that Gandhi was becoming, in my way of saying, a very nationalistic, almost chauvinistic way. That means anything India is good, any idea from outside is bad and throw it out. And Tagore definitely disagreed with it. He thinks India is no different from any other country. We must keep our doors and windows open. We must be willing to take great ideas no matter where it came from. On that, they had a very serious differences. And if I may, I'm not a historian, but I think Gandhi eventually matured. And the way Gandhi is remembered today is partly because of constant chastising of Tagore that he received.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. And I think so often history is just written by winners, and I think maybe you might want to readdress some of those things. But it's so, it's what government of India taught us is what might have conditioned our ways of thinking. I think we have to stop questioning here. We can talk about it during lunchtime, but I should get Lilia to come here and introduce Paul Gides. Thank you very much for listening.